Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Tonight I'm going to be answering two questions that I got on the video that I did about honesty. And it's the third video I did about honesty, when it's appropriate and when it's not. The first question is from Jen. Jen says, I am so guilty of giving people way too much information. I'm getting better though. Thank you for this. It's nice to be reminded that I'm entitled to privacy. By the way, just when you thought I wasn't going to ask a question. When it comes to future relationships and children, you don't think you have the right to disclose genetic predispositions to illness as it pertains to having children. If a child would have a specific thyroid gene, his or her thyroid would be removed as soon as they were old enough. You don't think someone has the right to know that could be a possibility? To be honest, I don't know how I feel about that. On one hand, someone does have the right to privacy, but why would you hide something like that from someone when you're going to get married? My initial feeling is that if something that you are consciously hiding, that becomes lying. Jennifer, that's an excellent question, and it really does put into the line about what type of relationship you want to have with the person you're marrying. One of my favorite lines from marriage, and you hear it in the vows, is for richer or poorer, through sickness and health. Now, that's a very beautiful line, but the reality is that a lot of people don't follow that. And when people get ill, people have a tendency of either moving away or going away from that person. Some people, as soon as they know there's a genetic predisposition, like to end things. Now, a genetic predisposition doesn't mean something's going to manifest. It just means there's a possibility. If you don't have a genetic predisposition, something could manifest, something that you did not know. Nobody is promised what's going to happen. Now, when you're having children, you might want to get your spouse tested for certain things, and you get certain things and see whether or not you're going to have certain issues. Example, in the African American community, sickle cell anemia is a common genetic disorder. So if you are recessive for sickle cell, and your partner that you're going to marry is recessive for sickle cell, you're going to give your child a greater chance of having it. In the Jewish community, Tay-Sachs, specifically in the Ashkenazi Jewish community, Eastern European Jewish community, not in the Sephardi or the Mediterranean. The Jews of that area are very prone to Tay-Sachs. But again, in order for that to happen, they both have to be tested to see if they both are positive for it. Now, you could have two people that get tested and say they want to go through it and get married anyway, and whether they have a child with Tay-Sachs is, I think, a 1 in 25% chance, 1 in 4, that they will. So that's a choice they have to make. And in that situation, you really do want to get tested and disclose. On the other hand, there are many genetic predispositions, and the more we learn about genetics, the more we're learning about them. But its manifestation does not always apply. Suppose we figure out there's a genetic predisposition for addiction, but you don't suffer from addiction. Would you have to tell your spouse that I have a pre-genetic disposition for it, even though it doesn't manifest in my life at all? So it really becomes a situation where you have to know what it is that you will disclose or not disclose. Also, you have to know whether the genetic predisposition is something that will affect your child, because you're 100% correct. If you have a genetic predisposition that could affect a child, only you having it, then first off, you should, if you have a good relationship, be able to disclose. But even if you don't, and you choose not to, you still want to get it checked, at least to the doctor, and say to the doctor, by the way, when my child comes in, I'd like you to check for this, just as a routine aspect of this, and you can speak to your doctor confidentially about that. So there are ways to get around it, but still be able to deal with things, and keeping your medical history confidential. I will tell you one story that actually happened. Actually happened more than once, where somebody was told they had a genetic predisposition, and they didn't disclose, and they got married, and they had a symptom. Now, instead of figuring out what that symptom was and whether or not it was related to that genetic predisposition, they automatically assumed it. They then disclosed their genetic predisposition to their spouse, the spouse being upset and angry, divorce them, causing lots of problems in both situations. And in both situations, neither of the people have developed any symptoms at all of the genetic predisposition. Both of them ended their marriages with first ones. Both of them got married to other people. One had children and one I think didn't. But they remarried and married other people after their marriages. One was a little bit longer in terms of the time. But this is what happens in this day and age. People have very differing feelings about these things. And it does become a situation where people can hold things against you. And you have to decide what type of relationship you want. Now, if you have something that's going to be transmissible to somebody else, then absolutely it is your obligation to tell them. And when you have children, it is an obligation to make sure they're protected. But that does not mean necessarily having to disclose. On the other hand, if you do disclose and you're able to be open about it and you have somebody you could talk to about it, that of course is the best. Because that is the most open aspect of a relationship, and you want somebody who you could be able to share all of that with. The sad part is some people have a difficult time in finding people less judgmental. And it does happen. And you can fall in love with somebody and you're afraid of that. And again, it is within your right for that privacy, even in HIPAA and the laws. And it's interesting because as a therapist, you hear about certain things that your clients will tell you that they won't tell their spouse. And that's not abnormal and that's not unusual. So disclosure becomes a situation that becomes important. Now, you want eventually, if you can, in a healthy and a good relationship, to disclose as much as possible. But most of what I was talking about was more about disclosing to other people that's none of their business. People ask a lot of questions and they have no problem with becoming overstepping their boundaries. And I was trying to say you have a right to put people in their place. But thank you very much, Jen, for the question. I very much appreciate it. Alex asks a question on the very same video. Alex says, great video. Dating would have been a lot easier for me in the beginning if I'd watched this. Well, I agree. It is good in the beginning that you don't put into that situation. Alex continue. That said, it all worked out well for me in the end, and I'm very happily married with children now. Well, congratulations to you, Alex. What struck me from your video is when you mentioned the importance of knowing the difference between an appropriate versus an inappropriate question, and that's something I've always struggled with. The heuristic, I have not think I've actually seen that in a sentence in a long time, except in a philosophy class. The heuristic that I assume that most people are essentially that they use is essentially the golden rule. That is only asking a question the asker would be comfortable answering if the roles were reversed. That heuristic doesn't work for me because I'm not a private person and very much enjoy sharing very personal details about myself. To compensate, I typically ask people few questions and try to have other people dictate how the conversation goes. This is all great for a few very talkative, genuinely interested people, but really holds me back on everyone else. I don't know if there's something one can easily address in a few simple rules, and it's more of a case by case and difficult to explain. But is that something I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on? Alex, it's a great question, and I very much appreciate for the words that you used, like I said, as going back to the days of philosophy class. You're asking a question that is very complex, and I want you to really think about the idea here. You're asking what the boundaries should be in terms of relationships that you have with other people. Now, I would love to tell you this is the healthy boundary and this is the line that you should keep, but it's much more complex than that. I will share, I have a particular family member who will walk over to complete and total strangers, start an entire conversation, tell them their life story, and get lots of people to get their life story back. And they ask all these questions. And every time I watch this go on, inside I'm cringing, going, I can't believe I'm watching this. Now, that's my feeling of comfortability. But for this family member, they're very, very comfortable with that type of information. Now, if you are comfortable sharing a lot of things, that's not always so problematic. On the other hand, if you have a wife, as you do, or you have in-laws, as I'm guessing you do, then it does become problematic if what you're talking about and sharing is going to cause issues in terms of the relationships between you and the family. So a good rule of thumb here would be to ask your wife the things that she would be comfortable with or not comfortable with. Sit down with her and get a back and forth conversation. Would it be okay if I asked your mother, when was the last time she had a good night's sleep? Well, she may say that's fine. She may say it's not fine. If you said, how long have you had that nightgown for? Maybe fine, maybe not fine. If you ask the recipe, certain people are very open and great about that. Other people go, no, Ma doesn't cook. She's buying out and she doesn't want you to know. So it really depends on so many different factors. So one of the ways to determine that is to have the conversation and get a sense of what your spouse would be comfortable in asking or having you ask her in-laws, your in-laws, her parents, or her in general or in public. Saying to your wife, how was last night, might not be very appropriate in front of guests. She may feel very embarrassed and she may feel very hurt, even though you may be like, oh, well, I thought it was really good. I wanted to share. That might be problematic. So again, the more you open up that communication, the more you talk about it with her, the more you understand the way that she feels comfortable, then the parameters get a little easier. I will tell you honestly, if I had that family member as a spouse, I would never be able to tolerate that, because it's just something that it goes way over the line of my comfortability. So when you're married to somebody else, a great way of doing that is to go off of them to see where those lines are and then be able to work it out that way. I hope that this was helpful. I hope this answered your questions. I hope that you will like this video if you liked it. I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't. And if you have a question or you disagree with anything I said, please feel free to respond in the comment section below, and I'll be very happy to respond. Have a good night and good mental health.